Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Lissa Rankin, and I'm so happy to be here with Anke Richter, the author of Cult Trip and the founder of the Decult Conference, and Dr. Jeffrey Rediger, the author of Cured. And we have been having a wonderful conversation. We could go on for hours, but we're going to try to wrap this up here. So, in our last segment, we were kind of talking about cult hopping and our various experiences around that. Did you want to share anything about your own story?
Sure. Yeah, let's see, where would be the best place to talk about this? I mean, I viewed spirituality for so many years as being such an important way to heal because the trauma and the violence of what I grew up with was extreme and very difficult to recover from. And
And you grew up under the influence of the IBLP cult.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 3 years ago, if someone had asked me about what role did seminary and spiritual training play in becoming a physician, I would have said, well, seminary was the most important part of my training to become a doctor. Now I would say that's true, and I also used it to pound in the indoctrination in a way that was very personally harmful. I kind of created my own cage and no longer needed someone to put me in that cage any longer. And in the ways in which that came out were I used spirituality as a way to support and rationalize conflict avoidance, for example. There's this saying, I think your daughter introduced me to this saying, that if you're wearing rose-colored glasses, then red flags are just flags. And that's a really good way to capture the way I use spirituality to not recognize people who maybe had a design on people who wanted access to me, whether because of being at Harvard or having money or whatever, and that became a way in which I became vulnerable to repeating the past in different relationships.
Well, I'm thinking of Oprah and John of God, even.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, sure.
Because there's a
she promoted him.
Yeah, and he was on Oprah talking about this.
Oh, right.
In 2010.
Right. Yeah, so long and short of it is, I graduated from residency back in 2002 and took a medical director job in an academic position, and then a woman, a nurse in the oncology unit at Mass General in Boston, came to me and said that she wanted help describing what pancreatic cancer was to her son and what this meant, since she had just been diagnosed with that. And then pancreatic cancer is a fatal cancer. It's one of the worst cancers you can get. It's people die shortly after the diagnosis, usually in a lot of pain, and it's a very difficult form of cancer. So we did that. We discussed this with her son, and then she took off for a healing center in Brazil, and went through this long healing process and started calling me, saying that she was feeling so much better. She was eating meat again. She was eating salad. She was overcoming all of these control issues and learning what love was for the first time. And she wanted me to look into it, since I had this dual training in spirituality and medicine. And I said no. And then so she was persistent. She began having people call me from around the country and elsewhere saying they had medical evidence for these amazing recoveries. Did I want to look into this? And I said no. I didn't think there was probably something outside of our traditional understanding in medicine that was going on. Long and short of it is, I did, in 2002, start to look into this because people were sending me their medical files, and although most of the stories and medical evidence could be understood from within traditional medicine for different reasons, some of them couldn't. And so I did begin to gather medical evidence and go deep into the lives of these people to try to understand what might be associated with their recovery. But I was also very conflicted about this, and I didn't want to give public credence to this person, John of God, because there were soft reports floating around that he was sexually involved with some of the women, and I didn't want people in a vulnerable place in their life to go to Brazil and then end up coming under his influence in a way that would be hurtful to them. Long and short of it is, in 2010, Oprah wanted to do a show on him called, I initially refused to go on the show, but then through a complex series of negotiations, I did go on the show. They were going to show a film that I was in anyway, and they thought it was based on a spiritual experience I'd had. They thought it'd be good for me to maybe be there to explain it. And so I did. And then, we made a lot of efforts. I mean, to her credit, Oprah's team sent 2 journalists down there to try to uncover the sexual abuse that I said. These are soft reports we've tried for years to get people to come forward and say if this is or is not going on. And once you start pursuing these reports, they tended to fade into the
Well, it takes so long usually before
yes.
people feel empowered enough, as happens every
Yeah.
time a cult is busted. It's like
Right.
you hear rumors, there's things
It can
on.
take
You
years.
can't
and
nail
It
it
can take
down.
years.
You
It's
start
so
looking for
hard.
details and things disappear.
Nobody wants to go on the record. Nobody's
Right.
pressing
Yeah.
charges.
Tell me
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was
That's
that,
right, yeah.
and so people just were too afraid, I think, to come forward, and it was really difficult to figure out. One woman did come forward, but she had a history of head injury, so she was more disinhibited in a way that made it complicated.
But the
So-
way you tell the story too, it's like John of God was definitely seeking you out, seeking out Oprah, like seeking
Yep.
to exploit
Yep.
the influence
Yep.
of, and Oprah got seduced, right? Oprah got seduced by this too, and
Yeah.
was absolutely.
She wouldn't be the first one, eh?
And then she
No.
erased every bit of evidence of that whole thing from the internet. You can't find it anywhere now.
Mm.
You know.
yeah.
And I think part of,
There
again,
were
cult
tons of
proofing our communities is like, we make mistakes. People make mistakes. My opinion, she absolutely owed those victims an apology for potentially luring people into a cult and, just owning her mistake. She was a victim too. People would forgive her, but the cover-ups are what create the really awful feelings for people that, like, really? You had the power to help, and instead you covered up that you made a mistake. Like, I certainly have promoted people who turned out to be people that I wish I hadn't promoted. But then I've also come forward and called it out. Once I realized I had made a mistake, I had said, hey, y'all, I recommended that you follow this person, and I no longer recommend this person, and here's why. And I name names.
This is so on topic. For me, it's going to be a bit of a jump from John of God to Osho or Sri Rajneesh, Bhagwan, but it's the same story because I'm ashamed that I spent a week at the Osho International Meditation Resort in Pune in 2017. That was the year before Wild Wild Country came out. I went there for a week with my husband. I was curious about it. I did some courses there. It felt very, very culty. I was kind of sniffing it out, but I also wanted the experience, so like a cult tourist in some ways. And I'm ashamed of that now because at the time we didn't know, or I didn't know, that Osho, or Bhagwan, let's just call him Osho now, he rebranded himself, right, was a serial sexual abuser. But also what I didn't know, and this is so close to my heart now, is how many of the children and teenagers in Pune and Rajneeshpuram, in the communes around the world, were sexually abused, and how they are still being victim blamed and shamed. And I'm interviewing one of them tomorrow. That is Sarita Carroll. I've just read her book for the second time, In the Shadow of Enlightenment, and I'm just livid reading it. It's the denial, not just what happened at the time, how these 12, 13-year-olds were sexualized, how they were raped, actually. I mean, this is the legal term for what happened to them, right? Even though they thought at the time that this was the right thing to do, to be sleeping with 30-year-old men, and it was so common practice. But what really makes me so angry is that there are still so many sannyasins, and I'm sure there's some in the area here, we're in Northern California, who don't see it that way, who think it's just that they should let go of their past, that this has been maybe an experience has been beneficial and they're just twisting it now, that the past doesn't matter, they should just move on. All that spiritual bypassing, this whole philosophy that is so baked into the New Age world, and especially into that movement, and also unfortunately into the human potential movement to some degree.
Yep.
It's always on
I
there
got
are no victims, right? It's just a story, and it makes me angry. And I mean, Wild Wild Country was a great doco for sure. Many people who had no idea around the world who Osho/Bhagwan was and what Rajneesh was and what went down. They got the whole crime saga, and it was accurately told, but they completely left out the story of those children.
Right.
And I feel really strongly about this. And when we say, when you said before, apologies are needed, apologies and accountability is still needed in that whole scene as well. And there are too many therapists floating around with their body work modalities that all come from that tradition, and no reparations have been made for these kids, no accountability, no justice, no one's been in court for the sexual abuse.
I said to Jeff, I was like, I don't understand. Oprah has so much money. She could have easily given a donation to each of the victims that came forward for the John of God thing as a way of saying, I didn't cause this abuse, but I enabled it. I promoted it. You know, and
not enough. Yeah. I agree.
I agree.
So
I want to ask you though,
across the board.
Why do you feel ashamed about that? This is one of the things that I hear from people who have are proximate with cults. It's like that shame belongs to the perpetrator. Like, we should not feel ashamed for getting seduced. We should take that shame and put it on the perpetrator.
I mean, it's hard enough for someone in a, how can I say this, in a normal sexual abuse situation to pass the shame back to the abuser, right? Giselle Pellicourt in France has shown us how to do that.
Right, for sure.
Or how to her. And it's a terrible, terrible situation that she's lived through, and she's done that. Now imagine you are part of a community where the common narrative is that wasn't a bad thing that happened to you, that you shouldn't be talking about it. You're going to lose that whole community. There is so much more at stake that makes you shameful. You should be joyful and happy. I'm constantly thinking of those former sannyasin kids, the brainwash they had from the get-go, that they shouldn't be negative. So how do you? So you're ashamed for even having bad feelings about this experience. We should all just be wonderful. So it's so complex. You don't even have the normal framework of a society, like, I'm sorry to use that term, like a normal sexual abuse victim who knows this rape also wasn't right. I need to go to the police at some stage, and there's still enough shame, there's still enough to impact, and it's still traumatic enough. But then if you don't even have those reference points of what's right and wrong,
this is what you're supposed to do. This is
how do you
spiritually blessed.
Wow, it's so complex, and this is why I'm so worked up about.
I know we have to start to wrap it up because we're about to lose our light.
But this is really my topic. This is where I've come from.
Tell us what's your what's your most passionate take-home point.
This is why I wrote my book.
And then Jeff, you can think of yours.
I wrote my book because I wanted to give these former kids from cults a voice, and I feel really strongly about this, and the accountability is missing. For me, it's not so much about what people have done in cults, because eventually, in some ways, everyone's a victim, and most people also become perpetrators to some degree. It's not even so much what they did in the cult. I'm not letting them all off the hook. But it's what are they doing after the fact, once it's become crystal clear, like with the Rajneesh and many other groups, and
John of God.
There's
still people down there at the retreat center.
Giving us a little moment here. So I feel, for me, it's about the accountability. Start again. For me, it's about the accountability after the fact. What do you do to redeem yourself and repair the damage that has been done in the name of the group that you once supported? And I'm not seeing enough of that. And it's still the relationships between the kids from cults and their parents. I mean, these kids are now in their 30s, 40s, often parents themselves, is still so fraught. And there's still so many apologies missing from the generation, from the first generation, or some the second, third above them. So this is something where I see a lot more work and accountability and acknowledgement needs to be done. The other thing I think is really important to say is it's never really about the content, because people like to argue with me about whether, is spirituality good or bad, or it's the yoga, or is it that form of, is religion, is every church cult, is religion bad? That's besides the point. It's not about the content. It's always about the kind of leadership, the kind of group, the kind of
I know if we
power
had more time,
dynamics,
we wanted
right?
to talk about how do we keep the sacred and lose the culty, right?
Yeah, but that's kind of, I think this is the crossover where we found ourselves in the pool at Esalen, that we share that we want to create better spaces. So look at it like, like people going on a jungle expedition. I'm not one of these people who say, oh, you should never ever go to the jungle because you're going to die there and it's too dangerous. No, go for it. Have an adventure. Have an extreme experience. Why not? You're human. Do it, right? Explore. But be wise about the equipment. Have the right guide. Do your homework about where you're going. Do your research. And
make sure the person who tries to give you ayahuasca is actually not a cult leader.
Right. And they have some safety protocols. And exactly, ayahuasca.
Or will take advantage of you in some way while you're under the influence. Right.
So
that was one of the hard things I witnessed a lot of, was like abuse of power from healers all over the world.
Oh,
yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Especially in the psychedelics.
And I had very much idealized that whole scene.
Oh.
Yeah.
Good on you for doing what you're doing, and good on you for speaking your truth. And I really hope that we get to collaborate more in that field. We have this sort of transatlantic connection now.
What about you, Jeff? What's your take-home point that you want our
I would say,
viewers to know?
It's important to learn the difference between love bombing, when somebody secretly has an agenda that they're not revealing to you, versus genuine loving experience. And that's a big one, I think.
Well, and it's tough because if you grew up in a cult, you have no model for that.
Right.
You don't have any experience of love. All you have is love bombing.
The sensor is off, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And I think also one of the criteria I use now when I look at spiritualities, for example, or spiritual groups, I'm very interested in knowing the truth, not what they say, but what's real around human rights, believing that every person has something good to offer, because a spirituality that's built too much around obedience and conformity instead of human rights is not a healthy spirituality.
Well, we just went to the New Kings protest and the hands-off protest and all the protests.
Yeah.
And Jeff's sign, you want to tell them what your sign said?
Yeah.
Mine said, "This is my resisting bitch face."
I saw that.
So Paul Farmer, who started Partners in Health at Harvard, he had a quote that I really love, and it's the idea that some people matter less is at the root of all that is wrong in the world. And cultic situations basically exploit that, because they maybe will say that they believe in human rights or that all people have value, but what is really going on is there's one set of rules for the cult leader and the ones close to him or her, and there's another set of rules unspoken for everyone else that might involve 18-hour days or being exploited sexually or having no human rights at all. You are simply owned by an extension of what the cult leader's goals are.
And the higher cause.
And the higher cause. And it can be cloaked in spiritual terms, but it's actually really dark stuff behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I guess my take-home point is I really care about, as a facilitator, as an author, as a leader in some of these spaces in personal growth and trauma healing and spirituality and such, is like I really want to empower. That's why I met with my group right away. I want to empower those who attend workshops, those who go to groups, those who are exploring an adventure, to know your power, to know your rights, to continually check in with your own parts around, am I in consent now and now and now? And what is consent? And is there just a compliant part of me that's just giving my power away to somebody? Like it sadly, it takes both sides of the dynamic to create, once we're adults, I'll say it that way, because kids have no power in those dynamics. But once we're adults, a part of us has to cooperate with the agreement, even though when there's coercive control, you can't consent, right? So to learn about coercive control, to learn about consent, to use the power that we do have to do the nervous system healing work so that we have enough nervous system resilience, so we're not conflict avoidant, so we can confront our leaders, so we can challenge the leadership, so that any group I'm in, like I need to feel free to go to Dick Schwartz and say, hey, can we talk about this? And to exercise those powers and to practice and learn discernment, so that if we notice that spellbound feeling, we also know that's a red flag. Right? That's limerence or that's limbic resonance. And it's like, wow, look, I'm falling in love with a total stranger. Like, that's not love. So
that's so interesting. And I just add that, because often when people want to argue with me about their group and they go, oh no, but this is they think it can't be cult because it feels so good. And I said, no, that's exactly, it's probably an indicator. Sorry to break that to you, but
if
the
you
fact
eroticize
that
it, right?
the fact that you're so into it and feel so good, that's probably a red flag.
Absolutely. And now now if I feel that feeling, I'm able to say, oh, this is that spellbound feeling, or this is that ecstatic bliss that I get when I'm under somebody's spell, or like, and I like it. Like, I have nostalgia.
It feels good.
I have nostalgia for my spiritual bypassing phase because it felt so good, but I didn't realize how many people were getting hurt. And I was lucky. I wasn't as hurt as many of the people, but I have serious bystander trauma from how many people that I saw who were less empowered than me, who got very hurt. And I felt bad enough about it that I came out on the Conspirituality podcast to support Rebecca Baruchi, who was calling out Hay House for racism at Hay House. And I had left Hay House, and I didn't call them out. I just kind of slunk into the background. And then when I heard Rebecca's story, I felt so much shame for not, being more confrontational, for not naming what I saw, for not publishing it on the internet. I could have destroyed 30 careers at least with what I know from my bystander trauma.
But you're speaking now, so
I know, but
thank
you.
Yeah.
But I was too conflict avoidant, so I had to do a lot of like somatic work and to develop the nervous system resilience to be able to name names and call things, speak truth to power, and to try to do it in a way that isn't narcissistic. Right?
And that gives you, doesn't that give you a lot of insight into how hard it is often for people to call something out? Because again, the outsider thinks, oh, if I'd been in that cult and that had gone down, I would have said something. Well, maybe you wouldn't have. And this gives you a lot of insight, even though it's so hard.
There are still stories I have only told privately to investigative journalists off the record, because I'm like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in lawsuits. Right? But I want you to know there's a story here. Go get it, and I can tell you off the record, but like, I'm not ready to go on the record for some of these things.
Yeah,
Well, the whole bystander psychology of this. I mean,
because it didn't happen to me. Right. I wasn't the victim. If I was the victim, I could press charges, I could tell the story, but it didn't happen to me, and the victims don't want to go public. So it's like,
right. And I had read a study recently that said that 82% of children did tell an adult that the abuse was going on, and almost never does the child get any support. They often are blamed. They are ignored.
Do you want to end with, I know you're writing an article about bystanders. Do you want to close, because we need to close down. Do you want to close with your final comments on bystanders?
Yeah, just that's where the power is, right? And yet the research is really clear. It's terrifying for us to stand up and be a whistleblower, because sometimes it's a mom who's getting beaten by her husband, and the man in the house is molesting the child, but she doesn't want to be kicked out on the streets as the mother with the child. And so there's all kinds of reasons. Sometimes people are fawning the abuser, and so they are too terrified to speak the truth, whether it's a powerful political figure or a boss or someone else. And other times it's because they stand to lose money or status, or and their own power-hungry parts become engaged.
Can I add one more thing? It's at the end of my book as well, because I'm originally from Germany. This is why I have an accent, for those who haven't figured that out yet. And my parents are children of the war, and I very much grew up with the books and the knowledge of the Holocaust. Even before I'd ever kissed a boy, I'd already knew what had happened in Auschwitz, so I have that imprint, and and of course, I had fantasies about having, if I had lived under Hitler, I would have been Sophie Scholl from the White Rose, or I would have been hiding Anne Frank on our attic. I wanted to be that person. I wanted to be the person who does the right thing in a system that's oppressive. I always love to think of myself. I would have been the whistleblower. I would have been that heroic person doing the right thing. But do we really know? And you with your research about bystanders, it's such a complex thing. And I guess unless we actually put to the test in an oppressive system, I can't honestly say for myself, even though I know I'm doing a lot of good work for other people at the moment, I have a bit of a savior complex maybe also because of my national history, right? But do we really know under pressure, in group situations, what role would take the enabler, the bystander, or the whistleblower or victim?
Yeah, well, can I tell you a little story about that as we close?
This is something you're very passionate about.
I am. It's been a life-changing piece of research that I saw. So most of us don't do anything, even though we think we would. So in Germany, for example, it's well substantiated that less than 1% of people actually helped Jews at such great risk to themselves and their families. And so there's this wonderful sociologist who trained at Berkeley years ago who studied 760 individuals there was objective evidence that they had helped rescue Jews at great risk to themselves and their families. And so then he did a ton of research, and his name was Samuel P. Oleiner, and he did some of this his wife also worked with. But they were able to uncover that the biggest difference between that less than 1% of people who actually helped the Jews versus the vast majority which aided and abetted the Nazis, the biggest difference was whether as children they'd been raised with corporal punishment. And so
whether they'd had empathy demonstrated after they made a mistake or not.
Yeah. So the issue he realized was the very small group of children who were raised with empathy and parents who helped them reason about right and wrong, learn their moral compass, versus the vast majority who were taught that the one with the biggest stick wins, which means the one with the biggest stick in the room wins. And in that process of that, you become separated from your own spidey senses and from knowing in your body what's right and wrong. The vast majority of people, many of whom I'm sure thought they would have done the right thing, did not. And the fact that how they were raised as children was the most decisive factor was shocking to me. And it really changed my understanding of how much work we have to do to change the society.
Well, I just want to close. I want to close with my awareness through the whole sacred medicine research and all of my bystander trauma and the powerlessness that I felt because I wasn't the victim who could go to the police. And the victims were confiding in me, but they did not want me to tell anybody. So I didn't know what to do with that. But one thing I really came to appreciate is the incredible power of investigative journalism. Like, I just didn't... I never really understood it. Like, I didn't realize how many DAs have ignored these stories, how many victims have been too intimidated to come up, and how long some of these people, like the whole story with Sarah Edmonston from A Little Bit Culty and the New York Times, and, like, these people have to develop these trusting relationships with investigative journalists when they are in a cult and they don't know who to trust. And to just the incredible, I just really had developed deep respect for the investigative journalists like you and others who are building these relationships with these cult survivors to help empower them to be able to go to the authorities to actually get justice, and to have Keith Raniere in jail for 120 years or something?
Yeah, I mean, the FBI didn't investigate until Sarah Edmondson was on the cover of the New York Times. And we have a situation in Australia, not New Zealand, but Australia, where an investigative journalist has done a whole podcast series about the Geelong Revival Church, and it actually now has led to an inquiry and possible law change in the state of Victoria, where coercive control groups will become a crime, hopefully. But let me tell you, as an as someone who has investigated cults over 10 years, I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I had to stop from vicarious trauma. So I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I did that. I was doing it as a freelancer, didn't have a news organization behind me where I would get supervision, or at least even have colleagues who understood what I did. This is part of my book as well. So thank you for saying that, because I agree. A lot of cult accountants, a lot of cult accountability and justice has only really come from journalism. But I can tell you, it's really hard to get those investigations over the line, even for big publications. Yes. Yep. The legalizing, the people who don't want to go on the record, the fear, the trauma you're dealing with as a journalist, people who are flipping and then back in their cult persona.
Yep.
It is so people out there who say, oh yeah, I mean the media that can make it up. I can tell you, what you find in the media about cults is usually just the tip of the iceberg, and there's often
so tell us
much
about
more.
your book and how we can find you, because we have to wrap up.
Okay, it's called Cult Trip Inside the Word of Start again. It's called Cult Trip Inside the World of Coercion and Control by HarperCollins. It's come out in the US, and you can buy it online, and you can find me on my website, ankerichter.net, or Google decult.net, which is the conference that you've listened to on a podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me into your home.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. And thank you, Jeff, for being here and being vulnerable with your stories. And thank you to our filmmaker, Jonathan McLeod, who is behind the scenes over here. And to all of you for watching. And please share this with your communities, with anybody that you think might benefit. And we look forward to the continued conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. That's good. That was fun.